What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Helen Parker stared out the kitchen window at the pale Ohio morning, the mist curling softly around the maple trees like memories she couldn't quite grasp. She had just finished her quiet breakfast, black coffee and a single toast, her hands trembling slightly, not from the cold but from the hollow ache of invisibility that had settled over her like a shadow. At 68, Helen felt the weight of years pressing down, a familiar heaviness that told her dreams were for the young, that the best parts of her life had already been lived and folded neatly away like the faded photos on the mantel. The silence in the house was almost deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the television, where a news anchor's voice cut through the morning calm, announcing SpaceX's latest rocket launch. Helen barely listened at first, her mind drifting to the empty chair at the table where her husband used to sit, to the echoes of laughter from children who had grown distant, caught in their own busy lives. But then the screen showed Elon Musk, his face lit by the glow of monitors and the fiery blaze of the launch pad, his eyes bright with an unshakable conviction. He spoke with a fierce energy, "We're pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Age, fear, failure, they don't get to decide our future." The word struck Helen like a jolt. Here was a man decades younger, yet fearless in his defiance of limits, refusing to accept "too old" or "too late" as excuses. Her heart quickened. Could it be true? Could the best years still be ahead? The rocket soared into the sky, a blazing comet against the blue, carrying not just cargo but a promise, that boundaries are meant to be challenged. Helen's fingers hovered over her phone. With a sudden impulse, she typed, "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning." What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She hesitated, then pressed send, the digital message a small beacon cast out into the vast, indifferent world. For years, Helen had felt invisible, a ghost in her own story. The ache of loneliness pressed on her chest, a reminder that age seemed to push people aside like worn-out furniture. Her children's voices, once warm and frequent, had thinned to polite check-ins, too busy to linger, too distracted to notice the shifting tides beneath her surface. Her friends, some gone, some lost to the distance that life's currents create, had left her with only memories and regrets. She thought of the typewriter gathering dust in the attic, the novel she'd once dreamed of writing but never dared to start. The house felt colder somehow, as if time itself had slipped through the cracks and left her behind. But Elon's words stirred something dormant, a fragile ember beneath layers of self-doubt and fear. If a man like him could shatter the impossible, could she find the courage to defy her own boundaries? Helen's mind raced with questions. Was it too late? Did anyone care? Was there still a place for her in this fast-moving world? The past week had been a blur of doctor's appointments and whispered warnings. "You need to slow down, Helen," her physician had said, concerned about her rising blood pressure and fatigue. "Don't push yourself so hard." But slowing down felt like giving up. Every wrinkle on her face told a story of battles fought, of loves lost, of dreams deferred. She refused to let the last chapter be one of quiet surrender. Outside, the morning light grew stronger, filtering through the lace curtains and casting patterns on the worn wooden floor. Helen closed her eyes and pictured the rocket again, climbing higher and higher, breaking free of Earth's gravity. She wanted to be like that rocket, to launch herself out of the gravity well of fear and regret, to ignite a new trajectory for her life. But the question lingered, how? The silence in the room wrapped around her, but this time it felt less like isolation and more like a blank canvas. She thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive, the way he refused to accept no for an answer, the way he had stared down failure after failure until he made history. What if she could borrow some of that courage? What if she could find her own mission, her own daring leap? Helen reached for the remote and paused the broadcast. The glowing screen held Elon's determined gaze, his voice echoing in her ears, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." She took a deep breath, the stale air of the kitchen filling her lungs like a promise. The clock ticked steadily. This was her moment. The moment everything changed. In the stillness, Helen opened a blank note on her phone and began to write. I'm Helen, 68 years old, and for too long I believed my story was over. But watching today's launch, I'm starting to think maybe it's just beginning. What's your story? What keeps you going? She hesitated, then hit send, releasing her words into the unknown. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flutter of hope, not the reckless hope of youth but the steady, resilient hope of someone ready to rise again. Outside, the sky stretched wide and endless, a vast frontier waiting to be explored. Helen Parker was no longer just a spectator. She was ready to launch. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Helen Parker's life had been full, rich, and complicated long before the rocket soared into the sky that morning. She often found herself drifting back through memories like pages in a worn photo album, each image tinged with both warmth and regret. Born and raised in a small Ohio town, Helen had always been a dreamer, a woman with a mind sharp as a tack and a heart wide open. As a young girl, she had stared at the stars with her father, who worked at the local factory but carried a love for space and science that he passed down to her. "Reach for what seems impossible, Helen," he'd say with a smile. That's how the universe expands. School had been Helen's refuge, a place where she thrived. She wasn't just a good student. She was passionate about literature and history, hungry to know the stories that shaped the world. She dreamed of writing one of those stories herself, imagining her name on the spine of a novel that would inspire others, just as she had been inspired. But life, as it often does, had other plans. At 22, Helen married Jim, a kind man with a steady job and a gentle laugh, who promised her a lifetime of companionship. Together they raised 3 children in a cozy house with creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, a house full of laughter, scraped knees, and birthday candles. Helen loved teaching. Her classroom was a place of joy and discovery, where she gave her students more than facts, she gave them hope, a belief that they could be more than what their small town expected of them. But as the years passed, Helen's own dreams quietly slipped away, buried under the weight of responsibility. Raising kids, managing the household, caring for aging parents. Each duty chipped away at the time she once imagined would be hers for writing and creating. The typewriter she bought at 25 sat untouched in the attic, its keys gathering dust beneath a faded quilt. There were moments when Helen would steal away to the attic, run her fingers over the cold keys, and feel a pang of loss. What if she had chosen differently? What if she had been braver? But those thoughts were dangerous, she knew, and so she tucked them away like old photographs too painful to look at. Then came the loss. Jim's heart attack struck without warning, a cruel thief stealing the steady presence that had been her anchor for over 4 decades. The funeral was a blur of flowers and condolences, but what lingered was the hollow silence of an empty house. The children scattered, caught up in their own lives and struggles. Calls became less frequent, visits rarer. Helen was left alone with her grief and the relentless ticking of time. Loneliness settled in like a thick fog. Friends moved away or passed on, and Helen's world grew smaller, her days repetitive and gray. She found herself talking to the walls, reminiscing about the past and wondering if anyone truly saw her anymore. Her children, caught up in careers and their own families, seemed to view her kindly but distantly. "Mom, you're doing great," her daughter Emily said on one rare phone call. "You need to slow down and enjoy retirement." But Helen felt anything but great. She felt invisible, like a relic in a world racing forward without her. She recalled a moment last Christmas when she had tried to share a story she'd written in secret, a small poem about hope and resilience. Emily smiled politely, then quickly changed the subject. The sting of dismissal was sharper than Helen expected. The typewriter remained silent, the attic dark. Her body, too, seemed to betray her. Arthritis crept into her fingers, making even simple tasks painful. Her energy waned. Mornings were the hardest, as if the night stole her strength and left behind only shadows. But it wasn't just physical, it was the erosion of spirit. Helen felt like a ship adrift, no sails, no wind, lost in a vast ocean. Yet somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of sorrow and self-doubt, a small ember still glowed. It was fragile, barely noticeable, but it refused to die. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the world outside was asleep, Helen would pull out an old journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with half-finished stories and sketches. She'd read a sentence or two and feel a flicker of the woman she used to be, the woman who dared to dream, who believed the future was hers to shape. Those moments were bittersweet, but they reminded her that she was still there, somewhere beneath the surface. She thought about Elon Musk's rocket launch that morning and the way it lit up the sky with fire and hope. What if she could find that fire again? What if it wasn't too late? Helen's heart clenched at the thought. She wanted to believe, but years of disappointment whispered a different truth. She had missed too many chances, lost too much. Still, she found herself staring at the typewriter, imagining the clack of its keys, the stories she might tell if only she had the courage. It was in this place, between despair and possibility, that Helen's journey would begin. The past was heavy, but it was not the end. The house, once silent and cold, seemed to breathe with a new kind of anticipation. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to claim. Helen Parker was ready to step into the unknown. The attic window caught the first rays of dawn, spilling light over the dust-covered keys, as if the universe itself was urging her forward. Time had taken much from her, but it had not taken everything. There was still life, still love, still the chance to rewrite the story. And for the first time in a long time, Helen dared to hope. Helen sat at her kitchen table, the morning sun casting long shadows across the scattered bills and unopened mail. The house was quiet except for the steady ticking of the old wall clock, each second marking the slow passage of time she felt slipping through her fingers like sand. She stared at her reflection in the window, lines etched deeply around her eyes, the silver strands in her hair catching the light, and wondered if anyone really saw her anymore. Is it too late? The question echoed relentlessly in her mind, a whisper growing louder with each passing day. The ache of invisibility had taken root deep inside her, twisting her thoughts into knots of despair. She remembered last week's visit to Dr. Reynolds, the kindly but firm physician who had looked at her charts and sighed. "Helen, I know you want to keep going, but your heart isn't what it used to be. You need to slow down, take it easy." The words had landed like a blow, not because they weren't true, but because they felt like permission to give up. To fade away quietly into the background. She wanted to argue, to shout, "I'm not done." But the words stuck in her throat. At the grocery store the day before, she'd overheard a group of younger shoppers talking about their plans and dreams, mentioning innovation and change as if those things belonged only to the young. The world outside her door seemed to move faster than she could keep up, as if age had built an invisible wall around her, locking her out of the future. Even her children, busy and distracted, seemed unsure what to say when she brought up her desire to start writing again. Emily, her eldest, had been gentle but clear. "Mom, we love you, but you have to be realistic. We want you safe and healthy. Please don't push too hard." The concern in her daughter's voice was real, but Helen heard something else beneath it, doubt. A doubt that maybe she was chasing shadows, clinging to dreams that didn't fit her life anymore. That she should accept her place and let the years slip by without resistance. That night, Helen curled into her worn armchair, clutching a faded photograph of her and Jim on their wedding day, both young and hopeful. She closed her eyes and fought back tears, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. Yet even in that dark moment, a quiet voice inside whispered, "What if it's not too late? What if there is still time?" The voice was fragile, almost drowned out by the noise of fear and regret, but it refused to be silenced. The next morning, Helen found herself scrolling through her phone, aimlessly at first, then stopping as she stumbled upon a podcast featuring Elon Musk. His voice was clear and unyielding as he spoke about failure and persistence. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The words hit her like a lightning bolt, igniting a spark deep within. Here was a man who had stared down bankruptcy and public doubt, who had been told his dreams were impossible, yet who kept pushing forward with a fearless heart. If he could challenge the impossible, maybe she could challenge her own limits. But old doubts fought back fiercely. "You're not Elon Musk," the voice sneered. "You're just a tired woman with aching joints and too many missed chances." Helen's heart raced. The inner war had begun in earnest, a battle between the safe resignation of years past and the wild, stubborn hope of something new. She replayed the podcast clip again, the echo of Elon's voice steady and strong, "Don't let fear decide your future." She closed her eyes and pictured the rocket launch, the fiery plume tearing through the sky, relentless and unstoppable. Could she be like that? Could she summon the courage to break free of her own gravity well? The conflict wasn't just internal. At the grocery store, a young clerk had made an offhand comment about old folks not understanding technology, a remark tossed without malice but full of assumption. Helen's cheeks burned with embarrassment and anger. Was she really so invisible, so out of place? The more she tried to hold on to hope, the more the world seemed to push back. Her physical body betrayed her with aches and exhaustion, her spirit battered by skepticism and silence. Yet the ember burned on, flickering but alive. That evening, Helen sat by the window and wrote in her journal for the first time in years. The words were hesitant, fragmented, a confession, a plea, a declaration. She wrote about her fears, her regrets, but also about the small flicker of hope sparked by Elon's words. "Maybe the future isn't about what I lost," she scribbled, "but what I still have to give." She pressed her hand over the page, as if to seal the promise. The next few days were a roller coaster of emotion. Moments of determination surged through her, followed by waves of doubt that threatened to drown her resolve. She found herself watching the SpaceX launch videos repeatedly, the sounds of countdown and ignition a mantra against despair. One afternoon, her daughter Emily called again. This time the conversation was different. Emily confessed she worried about her mother pushing herself too hard but also admitted she was proud of her courage to try. The exchange was awkward but honest, a fragile bridge rebuilding what had been frayed. Helen realized that she wasn't alone in her struggle, even those she loved carried their own fears about change and loss. Slowly, a plan began to form in her mind. If Elon Musk could take small steps toward big dreams every day, so could she. Maybe she didn't have to start with a novel. Maybe she could write a blog, share her thoughts, her journey, and connect with others like her who felt unseen and unheard. The idea both terrified and excited her. What if people laughed? What if no one cared? But what if they did? The night before she was to begin, Helen lay awake, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. She thought about the rocket again, the way it defied gravity with relentless force. "I can do this," she whispered to the darkness. "One step at a time." And so, in the quiet early hours, Helen opened her laptop, fingers trembling but determined, and began to write. The words flowed awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. She wrote about feeling invisible, about the sting of loneliness, about the desire to matter again. She wrote about Elon Musk's fearless mindset and how it had lit a fire inside her. When she finally hit publish, a wave of relief and anticipation washed over her. The inner war wasn't over, far from it, but Helen had taken her first step toward reclaiming her story. The world outside still moved fast, full of doubts and distractions, but inside her, a new battle had begun, one fought with hope, courage, and a stubborn refusal to be left behind. The rocket's roar was still echoing in her heart, a constant reminder that boundaries are made to be broken. And Helen Parker was ready to break hers. The morning light filtered softly through the thin curtains of Helen's living room as she sat on the edge of her worn couch, the laptop open before her like a portal to a new world. The cursor blinked steadily on the blank page, a silent challenge daring her to begin. Helen's fingers hovered uncertainly above the keyboard, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. Writing had once been a distant dream, tucked away like an old photograph in the attic, gathering dust beneath years of what-ifs and too-laters. But now, fueled by the spark Elon Musk's fearless pursuit of impossible dreams had ignited inside her, she was ready to take the first step. She typed slowly at first, each word a fragile promise to herself. Today, I begin again. The words flowed awkwardly but surely, revealing her heart's quiet yearning to matter, to be seen, to connect. She wrote about the loneliness that had wrapped around her like a shroud, the doubts that had whispered she was too old, too worn out, too irrelevant. But most of all, she wrote about hope, the stubborn ember that refused to die. Helen published her first blog post, not knowing if anyone would read it, but feeling the weight of possibility settle in her chest. That day, she stepped outside with a new purpose, determined to find the one thing she could change that might ignite the rest of her life. Inspired by Elon's relentless energy and his willingness to start small in pursuit of grand visions, Helen decided to take up walking. Simple, steady, something within her reach that could rebuild her strength and clear her mind. Her neighborhood was quiet in the early morning, the streets lined with familiar houses, flowering dogwoods, and the occasional chirp of birds. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool air brushed her face, filling her lungs with a freshness she hadn't noticed in years. With each step, Helen felt a small surge of defiance. This was her launch pad. The world outside might see her as fading, but she was pushing back, reclaiming her own gravity. The walk was harder than she expected, her knees ached, her breath came in shallow gasps, and doubts nagged at the edges of her resolve. But she kept going, reminding herself of Elon's words, if the rules are such that you can't make progress, then you have to fight the rules. She fought the pull of old habits, the temptation to retreat into silence, and with every step, the world seemed a little less daunting. At the end of the block, she stopped beneath a maple tree, its leaves just beginning to turn gold with the arrival of fall. The sight felt symbolic, a reminder that change could be beautiful even when it meant letting go. Helen's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a notification, a comment on her blog post. Thank you for sharing your story. It inspired me today. A stranger's words, simple but powerful, sent a thrill through her. For the first time in a long time, Helen felt connected, part of something bigger. Over the next few weeks, walking became a ritual. Each morning she laced up her worn sneakers and stepped out into the neighborhood, greeting familiar faces with a tentative smile. She noticed small things, the scent of fresh-cut grass, the chatter of children waiting for the school bus, the warmth of the sun on her skin. The physical activity stirred something beyond muscle and bone, it awakened her spirit. Helen began jotting down thoughts in her journal after each walk, reflections on her progress, her fears, and her hopes. She wrote about Elon Musk again, about how his daring leaps had reshaped the future, and how she, too, was daring to rewrite her own story. One afternoon, as Helen returned from a walk, she saw a group of teenagers gathered near the corner store. One of them, a boy with a skateboard, nodded at her as she passed. "Keep it up, ma'am," he said with a grin. Helen's smile widened. That small moment of recognition meant more than words could express. But the path wasn't without its challenges. On a particularly chilly morning, Helen's body protested fiercely, her joints stiff and her breath shallow. She wanted to give up, to crawl back to the comfort of her chair and forget the dream. Doubts swirled, what am I doing? I'm too old for this. Yet, she pressed on, remembering the rocket's fiery ascent, the refusal to quit despite the odds. She reached out to her daughter Emily with a message, "Some days are harder than others, but I'm trying." The reply was quick, warm, "I'm proud of you, Mom. Keep going." The encouragement was a lifeline. In her blog, Helen began sharing these struggles, her vulnerability resonating with readers who were also fighting their own battles. She wasn't alone. The community she found online, people her age and younger, connected by shared hopes and fears, became a source of strength. One day, inspired by Elon Musk's constant drive to innovate, Helen decided to take another small but bold step. She reached out to an old friend, Margaret, whom she hadn't spoken to in years after a painful falling out. The phone call was tentative at first, voices trembling with years of silence. But as they talked, memories and laughter began to bridge the gap. The reconnection was a reminder that renewal wasn't just about personal goals but also about healing relationships left behind. Helen's days began to feel fuller, richer. Her body grew stronger, her mind sharper, and her heart lighter. The spark Elon Musk had ignited was no longer a flicker but a growing flame. She realized that change didn't have to be monumental overnight, it could start with one small step, one brave choice, one moment of reaching beyond fear. And as she walked beneath the maple trees, feeling the crunch of leaves beneath her feet, Helen Parker knew she was no longer just drifting through life. She was launching into a new orbit, propelled by hope, resilience, and the courage to push beyond boundaries. The journey was far from over, but the direction was clear. She was ready to keep climbing, one step at a time. Helen sat in her small study, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the cluttered space filled with notebooks, photos, and her trusty laptop. It had been months since she published her first blog post, and the journey had been a roller coaster of emotions, triumphs tangled with setbacks, moments of soaring hope followed by bouts of self-doubt. But tonight, something was different. The screen displayed a message notification that made her heart skip a beat. It was an email from a well-known online magazine, one that focused on stories of resilience and reinvention. They wanted to feature her blog in an upcoming article titled, "Stories That Inspire, Finding Purpose After 60." Helen's hands trembled as she reread the message. The idea that her words, her story, might reach thousands of people was overwhelming. A mix of pride, disbelief, and fear swirled inside her. Could this really be happening? Could her quiet voice finally be heard? She leaned back in her chair and let the emotion wash over her. This was more than recognition, it was validation, a sign that her journey mattered, that her struggle to find hope and purpose was not in vain. The months leading up to this moment had been filled with daily walks, endless journaling, and countless blog posts sharing not just her progress but her raw vulnerabilities, the aches in her joints, the loneliness of an empty house, the ache of estranged relationships. Her readers responded with messages of encouragement, stories of their own battles with age, invisibility, and fear. Helen had discovered a community bound by courage, a web of connections that spanned far beyond her small Ohio town. But tonight's email felt like a breakthrough, a crossing of an invisible threshold. She smiled, remembering the moment it all changed, Elon Musk's words echoing in her mind, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." She realized that her odds had seemed long, that the path was steep and uncertain, but she had climbed anyway. The article led to an unexpected flurry of attention. Helen's blog visits soared, comments poured in, and she received invitations to speak on local radio shows and at community centers. With each interaction, her confidence blossomed. She spoke openly about aging, about the battles with invisibility and despair, about the power of small, courageous choices. She was no longer just a woman hiding behind a keyboard, she was a beacon for others who felt lost and left behind. Yet amid the excitement, vulnerability lingered. Helen knew that this breakthrough wasn't an endpoint but a milestone on a longer journey. The fear of failure still whispered at the edges of her mind, reminding her how far she had come and how much remained uncertain. She struggled with self-doubt, wondering if she could sustain the momentum or if this was just a fleeting moment in the spotlight. One evening, after a particularly emotional radio interview, Helen sat quietly with her journal. She wrote about the strange mix of joy and fear swirling inside her, the gratitude for the newfound purpose, and the raw pain of the years she had spent feeling invisible. Tears blurred her vision, but they were tears of release and healing. She was breaking through barriers not just of age but of self-imposed limits. The response from her family was shifting too. Emily called more often, sometimes sending articles about aging with dignity or stories of late-life success. Her son Mark reached out tentatively, asking about her blog and even suggesting they collaborate on a video project. The distance that had stretched between them began to shorten, bridged by Helen's openness and courage. The emotional climax came one crisp autumn afternoon at a local community event where Helen was invited to share her story. The room was modest, filled with people ranging from retirees to young adults curious about reinvention. As Helen spoke, her voice steady but filled with feeling, she recounted her journey, the loneliness, the doubts, the spark of hope ignited by a man she'd never met but who had inspired her to defy the limits of age and fear. She told them about her small daily walks, the reconnection with old friends, and the power of sharing her story. Eyes glistened with tears, heads nodded in recognition. Afterward, a woman approached, clutching Helen's hand. "Your story gave me permission to dream again," she said softly. "Thank you." Helen felt her own heart swell, a mixture of humility and joy so profound it left her breathless. She realized then that breaking through wasn't about grand achievements or viral fame. It was about touching lives, about the quiet power of one person daring to matter. That night, alone in her study, Helen closed her eyes and whispered to the past, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." And in that moment, the woman who had once felt invisible stepped fully into the light, ready to continue her journey not as a relic of the past but as a force for hope and change. Helen sat quietly on her porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting a golden hue over the neighborhood she had walked so many times. The cool breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying the scent of autumn and distant memories. It was a moment of stillness after months of motion, a rare pause that invited reflection. She traced the lines on her hands, weathered but steady, and thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a place of doubt and loneliness to a space filled with purpose and connection. The story she once thought was over had only just begun. In her mind, she replayed the question that had haunted her for so long: is it too late? For years, she had answered with silence, with retreat, with resignation. But now, that question had transformed into something else, a challenge, a spark, a call to action. Helen realized that aging was not a sentence but a chapter, one she could write with intention and courage. The decision to start walking, to write, to reach out, these small acts had broken open a world she thought she'd lost forever. She remembered the faces of those who had reached back to her, strangers who found strength in her words, friends renewed, family bridges rebuilt. Her blog had become more than a diary, it was a legacy in the making. One afternoon, Helen received a letter from a young woman named Claire who lived halfway across the country. Claire wrote about feeling trapped by her own fears, about watching her mother struggle with aging and loss. Reading Helen's words had given Claire permission to hope, to believe that life could change, no matter the obstacles. Helen folded the letter carefully, her eyes misting with tears. This was why she had fought so hard, to leave something meaningful behind. That night, she sat at her desk and penned a new blog post titled, "The New Legacy." She wrote, "I used to think legacy was about what you leave in stone or money, but now I see it's about the lives you touch, the courage you inspire, and the hope you ignite." She shared her own story not as an ending but as a beginning, inviting others to join her in rewriting the narrative of aging. Helen's message spread beyond her small town, reaching listeners on podcasts, readers in far-flung cities, and even catching the attention of local news outlets. She was invited to speak at senior centers and universities, bridging generations with her honesty and heart. Each encounter reminded her that the power to change was not confined to youth but lived in the determination to act despite fear. In one memorable talk, Helen stood before an audience that spanned ages and backgrounds. She shared the story of Elon Musk's influence, how his fearless vision had sparked her own leap into the unknown. "We don't have to be rocket scientists to reach for the stars," she told them, her voice steady. "But we do have to believe we're worth the climb." After the talk, an elderly man approached and said, "You gave me hope I didn't know I still had." Helen smiled, realizing that her legacy was unfolding in ways she had never imagined. At home, her children noticed the change too. Emily and Mark saw their mother glowing with renewed life, a fire that hadn't dimmed but grown stronger. Family dinners became lively again, filled with stories and laughter. The gaps carved by years of silence were beginning to close. Helen's reconciliation with Margaret, her old friend, blossomed into weekly meetups filled with shared memories and plans for the future. They talked about starting a local support group for others seeking purpose in later life, a project that felt both exciting and daunting. Helen understood that her legacy was not just personal but communal, a ripple that could spread far beyond her own story. One evening, Helen looked through an old photo album and paused on a picture of her younger self, bright-eyed and hopeful. The years had carved their marks, but the essence of that woman remained, resilient, brave, and ready. She whispered to the photo, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The words felt like a key turning in a lock, unlocking a door to endless possibilities. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Helen felt a profound sense of peace. She knew the journey ahead would have challenges, but she was no longer afraid. The lessons she had learned, to push boundaries, to embrace vulnerability, to hold on to hope, were gifts she carried like a torch to light the way. Her legacy was not in the years behind but in the impact she would continue to make, in the lives she would touch, and in the courage she would inspire. Helen closed her eyes and smiled, ready to keep reaching, keep dreaming, and keep living fully. Because the story of her life was still unfolding, and the best chapters were yet to come. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and pine as Helen stood at the edge of her backyard, gazing up at the vast expanse of sky stretching endlessly above her. It wasn't the stars she was focused on this time but the space just beyond her reach, a new frontier, not in miles or light years, but in mindset and spirit. The blog, the walks, the community outreach, all had been vital steps, but Helen felt the stirring of a deeper challenge. Inspired by Elon Musk's relentless drive to break barriers and explore the unknown, she realized that the next phase of her journey would require venturing beyond comfort zones she hadn't dared to cross before. She wanted to build something tangible, a creation born from her hands and fueled by purpose. The idea had taken root during one of her weekly calls with Margaret. They had talked about their dreams, the projects left unfinished, and the joy found in making. Why not start a makers club? Margaret had suggested with a sparkle in her eyes. For people like us, who thought our time had passed but still have fire to burn. The idea ignited Helen's imagination. She remembered the old garage, cluttered with dusty boxes and forgotten tools, relics from a different time, from a life when her hands had been busier and her heart wilder. That very afternoon, Helen climbed the creaky steps to the garage, the wooden floor groaning beneath her feet. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows that danced across workbenches and shelves. She began clearing space, uncovering rusty screwdrivers, stacks of paint cans, and a battered toolbox she hadn't opened in decades. Each item was a story, a memory, a symbol of possibilities waiting to be reclaimed. The transformation was slow but steady. Helen cleaned, sorted, and organized, her muscles aching but her spirit alight. She set up a small workbench by the window, where the light was brightest, and began sketching ideas for projects, simple wooden toys, birdhouses, even small furniture pieces. The act of creating grounded her in the present, reminding her that her hands could still shape the world around her. Word of Helen's plan spread through the local community center and her blog readers. Soon, others reached out, eager to join a makers club for older adults. Some were hesitant at first, shy about trying new skills or afraid they'd be too slow or clumsy. But Helen welcomed each person with warmth and encouragement, channeling Elon Musk's belief that failure was just a step toward success. "We're here to learn, to try, and to grow," she told the group at their first meeting, held in a renovated garage that had become a beacon of possibility. The space filled with laughter, the hum of tools, and the quiet determination of people rediscovering their worth. Helen found herself teaching others, but also learning, about patience, resilience, and the joy of shared effort. The Makers Club became more than a hobby, it was a community of dreamers defying the limitations often placed on aging bodies and minds. One afternoon, as Helen hammered the final nails into a birdhouse, a young volunteer named Jason asked about her journey. She shared the story of how Elon Musk's audacity had inspired her to push past fear and doubt, to start small but think big. Jason nodded, impressed. "It's amazing to see someone reinvent themselves like this," he said. Helen smiled, feeling a surge of pride not just in the projects they built but in the courage they all found together. The garage soon became a hub of creativity, hosting workshops, exhibitions, and even a small fundraiser to support local charities. Helen and her group crafted handmade gifts for nursing homes, refurbished furniture for community centers, and built ramps for neighbors with mobility challenges. Each creation was a testament to their newfound purpose and the belief that age was no barrier to impact. Meanwhile, Helen's blog chronicled this new chapter, blending personal reflections with practical tips and stories from the Makers Club. Readers wrote in with their own projects and dreams, inspired to start their own new frontiers. Helen felt a profound connection to this wider movement, a tapestry of lives intertwined by the courage to act. Yet, with every success, there were moments of frustration and fatigue. Not every project went as planned. Nails bent, paint splattered, and plans sometimes faltered. But Helen learned to embrace these setbacks, recalling Elon Musk's words about the value of failure as a teacher. "If you're not failing, you're not innovating," she repeated to herself, turning each challenge into a lesson. One evening, as she packed up the tools after a busy day, Helen paused to look around the garage, once a dusty relic, now alive with color and energy. She thought about how far she had come, from the woman who once doubted her worth to a leader guiding others into new possibilities. The journey was far from over. Inspired by Elon Musk's vision to push humanity toward new horizons, Helen felt ready to dream bigger still. She began researching community grants and nonprofit programs, envisioning a permanent makerspace for older adults and retirees, a place where creativity and purpose could flourish beyond her backyard. With Margaret by her side and the support of her growing network, Helen drafted proposals, attended meetings, and rallied local businesses. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, each step forward a reminder that change was possible at any age. One memorable afternoon, the local newspaper ran a feature on Helen and her Makers Club, highlighting their impact and vision. The article attracted attention from city officials and philanthropists interested in supporting the cause. Helen's phone rang often, messages poured in, and the momentum built. Through it all, Helen remained grounded in the lessons she had learned, to start small, to embrace failure, and to push boundaries without fear. As autumn turned to winter, Helen found herself reflecting on the meaning of legacy. It wasn't just about the physical projects or the blog's reach but about the spirit she had cultivated, a spirit of relentless curiosity, boldness, and connection. She was no longer defined by age or limitations but by the courage to forge new paths. One chilly evening, Helen sat by the fire with Margaret, sipping tea and sharing dreams of the future. "Do you think we're really making a difference?" Margaret asked softly. Helen smiled, her eyes shining with conviction. "Every birdhouse built, every friendship formed, every story shared, it all matters. We're proof that it's never too late to explore new frontiers." Outside, the stars twinkled in the clear sky, reminders of the vastness beyond and the infinite possibilities ahead. Helen felt a quiet thrill, knowing that, like Elon Musk reaching for Mars, she too was part of something bigger, a movement to push past boundaries and ignite new beginnings. The journey would continue, ever upward, fueled by hope and the courage to dream without limits. Helen sat in the worn leather chair in her living room, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of a notebook filled with ideas and plans. The Makers Club had grown beyond her wildest expectations, but with growth came new challenges, funding hurdles, coordination issues, and a growing fear that the momentum might stall. She had always admired Elon Musk for his willingness to risk everything on uncertain ventures, and now she found herself at a crossroads, needing to decide whether to leap into the next big step or retreat to safer ground. The phone call that came that morning had unsettled her. A potential grant that could fund a permanent makerspace was within reach, but the application deadline was tight, and the competition fierce. Helen knew this could be the turning point for their entire project. She glanced around her cozy home, the walls decorated with photos of the Makers Club's early creations, a birdhouse painted in bright colors, a wooden bench polished smooth, a small robot built by one of the younger volunteers. Each was a symbol of what had been possible when she dared to believe in herself again. But this next step felt daunting. Doubts whispered in her mind, what if she failed? What if the club dispersed? What if age really was an invisible barrier she couldn't break? Then she remembered the words from an interview she had watched late at night, Elon Musk's voice steady and unyielding, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The phrase echoed in her mind, a clarion call to courage. Helen took a deep breath, closed the notebook, and made a decision. She would go all in. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Helen drafted the grant proposal with meticulous care, reaching out to every contact she had made over the past year. She enlisted Emily and Mark to help with budget numbers and community impact statements. Margaret became her sounding board, offering encouragement and critical feedback. The team worked late into the nights, fueled by passion and the shared belief that this makerspace could change lives. At one point, Helen felt overwhelmed, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. During a quiet moment, she found herself scrolling through news articles about Elon Musk's SpaceX missions, the fiery launches, the crashes, the relentless perseverance. His failures had been public, painful, and costly, but he never stopped. Helen drew strength from his example, reminding herself that setbacks were part of the process, not signs to quit. When the proposal was finally submitted, a mix of relief and anxiety settled over her. The waiting period was agonizing. Helen threw herself into club activities, focusing on the creative work and the connections she was building. The group painted signs, built new projects, and shared stories of personal transformation. It was a reminder that their purpose went beyond funding, it was about community and hope. One chilly evening, as Helen was locking up the garage after a productive session, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the grant committee. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The subject line read, Grant Award Notification. Helen's eyes scanned the message. They had been awarded the funding. A surge of disbelief and joy flooded her. The months of effort, risk, and doubt had paid off. She sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. This grant meant more than money, it meant validation, a chance to build a lasting legacy, to create a place where age was not a limitation but a source of wisdom and creativity. The news spread quickly. Volunteers rallied to prepare the new space, a former warehouse donated by a local business owner who believed in Helen's vision. Walls were painted, workbenches assembled, and tools gathered. Helen oversaw every detail, driven by the knowledge that this was a dream realized through perseverance and community. The grand opening was a celebration filled with laughter, speeches, and tears. Helen stood at the podium, her voice steady but full of emotion. She spoke about the journey, the doubts, the setbacks, the inspiration drawn from Elon Musk's fearless pursuit of the impossible. We are here because we dared to believe that it's never too late to build, to create, and to matter, she told the crowd. Faces in the audience reflected her own journey, older adults rekindling hope, young volunteers inspired by the courage around them, families bridging generations. The makerspace quickly became a hub of innovation and connection. Workshops filled with eager participants learning woodworking, robotics, and digital design. Helen watched as people who had once felt isolated found purpose and friendship. The space buzzed with energy, a testament to what was possible when fear was met with action. But the journey was far from smooth. Challenges arose, funding fluctuations, volunteer burnout, and technical difficulties. Helen learned to navigate these with patience and resilience, drawing again on Elon Musk's example of iterative improvement. She embraced the idea that progress was rarely linear, and that each obstacle was an opportunity to adapt and grow. One particularly difficult week, Helen faced a crisis when a key piece of equipment broke down just before a major workshop. The disappointment was palpable among the group. Instead of despairing, Helen rallied the team, encouraging them to troubleshoot and find creative solutions. They improvised with makeshift tools and improvised lesson plans, turning the setback into a chance to teach problem-solving and flexibility. The workshop went ahead, and the participants left inspired not just by the projects but by the resilience they witnessed. Helen realized that this makerspace was teaching more than skills, it was teaching life. Beyond the technical achievements, the emotional transformation was profound. People who had felt invisible found voices, talents, and confidence. Helen herself felt transformed, no longer defined by age or past regrets but by her ability to create and inspire. One afternoon, as she walked through the bustling space, a young man approached her with a shy smile. "Thank you," he said simply. "You've changed how I see aging. It's not an end but a beginning." Helen's heart swelled. That moment was the essence of her new legacy. In quiet moments, Helen reflected on how far she had come since that first lonely evening when Elon Musk's words had lit a fire inside her. She had crossed a threshold, from doubt to daring, from isolation to community, from fear to fearless pursuit of purpose. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But Helen was no longer afraid. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. As twilight settled over the town, Helen stood outside the makerspace, watching the glow of light spill from the windows, laughter and voices mingling like music on the night air. She whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." And with that, she stepped into the future, ready to keep building, dreaming, and inspiring, a living testament that it's never too late to cross the threshold and change your life. Helen woke early, the sky still wrapped in the soft blue-gray hush of dawn. The quiet moments before the day began had become her sacred time, a chance to gather strength and set intentions. Today was special. It marked the one-year anniversary of the grand opening of the makerspace, a milestone that once seemed impossible. She thought back to the countless nights spent drafting grant proposals, the early mornings sweeping the floors of the donated warehouse, and the waves of doubt she had weathered. What had begun as a small idea had blossomed into a thriving community, a beacon of hope for those who had once felt invisible and powerless. The anniversary event was planned to be a celebration but also a reflection, a chance to honor the journeys of everyone involved and to look ahead. Invitations had gone out to local leaders, volunteers, and the many people whose lives the makerspace had touched. As Helen prepared her speech, she felt the familiar blend of excitement and nerves. Public speaking was never easy, but this moment was bigger than her fear. It was about the community, the collective courage, and the power of transformation. The room filled steadily with familiar faces, older adults with paint-streaked hands, younger volunteers eager to learn, families bridging generational divides. The energy was palpable, a hum of shared purpose and pride. Helen began by sharing her own story, the loneliness, the doubts, the spark that came from hearing Elon Musk's relentless drive to push boundaries and reject limitations. Elon once said, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," she reminded the audience. "That's what we did here. We chose hope over fear." As she spoke, Helen scanned the room, catching the eyes of those who had walked alongside her. Margaret, now a core member of the organizing team, smiled warmly. Emily and Mark stood near the back, beaming with pride. The room echoed with applause, but more importantly, it was filled with a sense of belonging, a family formed not by blood but by shared dreams and effort. After the speeches, the event shifted to a showcase of projects created over the year. Tables lined with handcrafted furniture, robotics kits, paintings, and woodworking projects told stories of perseverance and growth. Visitors marveled at the craftsmanship and the spirit behind each piece. One table caught Helen's attention, a collection of journals and letters from participants, reflections on what the makerspace had meant to them. Helen picked up a letter from a woman named Ruth, who wrote about finding joy again after years of isolation. "This space gave me a reason to wake up every morning," Ruth had penned. "It reminded me I still have gifts to share." Tears pricked Helen's eyes. These were the echoes of change she had hoped for: lives touched, spirits renewed, communities woven tighter. The celebration continued with music and shared meals, laughter blending with stories of challenges overcome. Helen felt the weight of gratitude settle around her like a warm blanket. Yet even amid joy, she sensed a stirring, a call to push further. The makerspace had become a hub, but there were still so many others out there, older adults living in isolation, waiting for their own spark. Inspired by Elon Musk's vision to take humanity further, Helen began dreaming of expansion, of creating a network of makerspaces that could reach across cities and states, igniting hope in countless lives. The challenge was immense, but so was the potential. Back at home that evening, Helen sat by the window, watching the stars flicker in the night sky. The vastness above reminded her of the infinite possibilities ahead. She opened her laptop and drafted a proposal for a regional grant to support expansion. She reached out to other community leaders, sharing the vision and inviting collaboration. The response was encouraging: people hungry for change, eager to build on the foundation Helen had laid. One of the most touching moments came when a local television station featured a documentary on the makerspace impact. The segment showed interviews with participants, clips of workshops, and scenes of laughter and connection. Helen's story, intertwined with the group's collective journey, was broadcast to thousands, inspiring viewers across the region. Letters poured in from seniors and families, many expressing gratitude and a newfound belief in second chances. Helen's inbox overflowed with requests for advice, partnerships, and stories. Each message was a reminder that the ripples of change were growing into waves. Yet, Helen remained humble, grounded by the knowledge that true transformation was a slow, patient process. She kept returning to the principles Elon Musk embodied: relentless curiosity, fearless innovation, and a refusal to settle for the status quo. She encouraged her team to experiment with new programs: virtual workshops for those who couldn't travel, intergenerational projects pairing seniors with local schools, and outreach to rural areas where loneliness was especially acute. The makerspace became more than a place, it was a movement. With every step forward, Helen felt the boundaries she had once believed unbreakable fall away. She remembered the early days of walking alone, the nights filled with doubt, the voice that whispered, "Too late." Now, that voice was drowned out by the chorus of lives transformed. Helen's relationship with her family deepened. Emily, inspired by her mother's resilience, began volunteering regularly, while Mark helped develop a website to connect makerspaces nationwide. Their support filled Helen with a profound sense of purpose and joy. Even Margaret, once distant, had become a trusted partner and friend. One afternoon, Helen received a phone call from an unexpected source, a representative from a national foundation focused on aging and innovation. They had seen the documentary and were impressed by the makerspace's success and potential for wider impact. They invited Helen to speak at a national conference on aging, technology, and community building. The invitation was both thrilling and intimidating. Public speaking had become easier, but this was a larger stage, a chance to share the story with policymakers and thought leaders who could influence change at a systemic level. Helen prepared meticulously, crafting a speech that wove personal narrative with data and vision. She emphasized the need to see aging not as decline but as opportunity, a time for reinvention fueled by community and creativity. On the day of the conference, Helen stood before a packed auditorium. She spoke with honesty and passion, sharing her journey and the lessons learned from Elon Musk's example of audacity and persistence. The audience responded with standing ovations, and afterward, Helen was approached by leaders eager to partner and expand the model nationwide. That night, Helen reflected on how far she had come, from a woman questioning her worth to a visionary advocating for change on a national stage. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty and hard work, but she was ready. The echoes of change were no longer whispers but a clarion call, inviting her to lead with courage and compassion. As she gazed out the hotel window at the city lights, Helen felt a profound sense of peace. She was part of something bigger, a movement transforming lives, shattering stereotypes, and redefining what it meant to grow older. She whispered to the stars, "Thank you for reminding me that we all have the power to change, no matter our age." And with that, Helen closed her eyes, ready to keep pushing boundaries, to keep dreaming, and to keep inspiring, because the echoes of change were only just beginning to resound. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Helen sat in the small conference room of the makerspace, the hum of the overhead lights blending with the faint sounds of tools clinking and laughter from the workshop just beyond the door. Around the table were faces she had come to trust: Emily, Mark, Margaret, and a few new volunteers. The mood was tense but hopeful. They had just received news that the regional grant, the one that would fund expansion across neighboring towns, was under serious review due to budget cuts and shifting political priorities. It was a blow they hadn't expected, and the implications were heavy. Helen's heart pounded as she absorbed the news. The grant represented not just funding but validation, proof that the vision she had nurtured was worthy of support. Without it, the dream of reaching more seniors, building a network of makerspaces, risked stalling. For a moment, doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering the old fears: is it too late? Are you fooling yourself? Maybe you're pushing too hard. But Helen pushed back against the creeping shadows. She remembered Elon Musk's unyielding spirit, the countless setbacks he had faced, from rocket explosions to business failures, and how he pressed on regardless. "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor," she murmured, clutching the quote like a lifeline. That night, Helen lay awake, her mind racing through possible next steps. She could appeal the decision, seek private donors, even scale back the expansion plans to survive. But something inside her stirred, an urgent need to not just survive but to thrive, to prove that age was no barrier to boldness. The following morning, Helen convened a strategy session. The group brainstormed ideas furiously: crowdfunding campaigns, partnerships with local businesses, social media drives, community events. The makerspace had become a symbol of resilience and creativity. They would leverage that spirit to rally support. Emily proposed creating a short documentary featuring participant stories to share online and at community gatherings. Mark volunteered to spearhead a digital fundraising campaign. Margaret reached out to local press contacts, determined to get their story in front of as many eyes as possible. Helen herself drafted heartfelt letters to potential donors, sharing the vision and the lives touched. Days turned into weeks, and the makerspace became a whirlwind of activity. The crowdfunding page went live, sharing videos of laughter, learning, and transformation. Stories of seniors overcoming isolation, learning new skills, and building friendship spread like wildfire across social media. Helen watched the numbers climb, feeling a renewed sense of hope with every dollar raised and every encouraging comment received. But the fight wasn't easy. Some days were discouraging. Comments doubting their cause, technical glitches, and the exhaustion of balancing day-to-day operations with fundraising efforts. Helen felt the weight of responsibility deeply, but she refused to let it crush her spirit. Late one evening, as she scrolled through messages, she found a comment that stopped her cold. It was from a stranger who had once felt too old to matter, but found inspiration in the makerspace story and had just donated. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not finished," the message read. Tears blurred Helen's vision. Moments like this were the fuel she needed. She shared the message with the team, and it became a beacon of light during difficult times. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. A local tech company, impressed by the makerspace impact, offered a generous sponsorship and technical support. The partnership opened doors to new resources and expertise. With this boost, Helen felt the dream surge forward again. The community rallied behind them. Neighbors hosting bake sales, local artists donating supplies, and schools volunteering to collaborate on intergenerational projects. As momentum built, Helen found herself invited to speak at a regional summit on aging and innovation. Standing at the podium before a crowd of policymakers, activists, and industry leaders, she shared not just the success story but the struggle, the setbacks, and the relentless hope that fueled the makerspace. She quoted Elon Musk's words about pushing boundaries and daring to dream big. "Age is not a limit but a launchpad," she declared. The response was powerful. Conversations began about funding models, support systems, and policy changes to empower aging communities across the state. Helen's vision was no longer just a local initiative but part of a larger movement. Yet the path ahead remained rugged. One afternoon, Helen faced a harsh confrontation with a city official skeptical of the project's sustainability. The official questioned whether investing in senior programs was a wise use of resources. Helen's heart pounded, but she stood firm, sharing data, personal stories, and the growing evidence of the makerspace's transformative power. She challenged the official to see beyond numbers, to recognize the humanity and potential waiting to be unlocked. It was a test of courage and conviction, but Helen refused to back down. After the meeting, Helen retreated to the makerspace's quiet corner, where the soft hum of creation and connection soothed her. She realized that advocacy was as crucial as creation, that changing hearts and minds was part of the journey. Days later, an unexpected email arrived. The Regional Grant Committee had reconsidered, impressed by the outpouring of community support and the makerspace's demonstrated impact. They were awarding the grant, with the hope that Helen's vision would inspire other communities to follow suit. Helen's chest tightened with gratitude and disbelief. The tipping point had arrived. The moment where perseverance met opportunity, where hope was no longer fragile but fierce. The announcement sparked a new wave of excitement and responsibility. Expansion plans accelerated, new partnerships formed, and Helen's vision blossomed beyond what she had imagined. The Makerspace network began to take shape, each new location echoing the spirit of the original, a place of creation, connection, and courage. Helen's own transformation was profound. She felt stronger, more empowered, and deeply connected to a purpose that transcended age. The voice that once whispered, "Too late," was drowned out by the chorus of lives renewed and futures reclaimed. On a crisp autumn evening, Helen stood outside the bustling makerspace, watching volunteers pack up tools after a day of workshops. The laughter and chatter were a melody of hope and determination. She thought of Elon Musk, the relentless innovator who had inspired her to dream beyond boundaries and to believe in the power of risk and resilience. Helen whispered to the night sky, "Thank you for showing me it's never too late to push the limits." The journey was far from over, but she was ready. With each step, Helen proved that age was not a cage but a launchpad, a beginning, not an end. The tipping point had come, and the future was wide open. The soft hum of the makerspace was a constant companion to Helen now, a soundtrack to her days and nights filled with possibility. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one she hadn't quite anticipated. The expansion was moving forward with impressive speed, new makerspaces opening in neighboring towns, partnerships blossoming, and more people joining the movement. Yet, Helen felt the weight of the growing responsibilities pressing down on her shoulders like a relentless tide. One afternoon, as she sat behind her desk surrounded by stacks of grant applications, emails, and design prototypes, Helen's phone buzzed with a message that unsettled her, her doctor's office, reminding her of her upcoming checkup. The word checkup stirred a quiet unease. The aches in her joints had been growing more persistent, and some days she felt the familiar fatigue settle in deeper than usual. But Helen had pushed those concerns to the back of her mind, focused on the mission. Now, the reality of aging pressed closer. At the clinic, the doctor's tone was gentle but firm. "Helen, I'm seeing some signs of early arthritis and elevated blood pressure. It's nothing immediately alarming, but you need to slow down, get more rest, and prioritize your health." The words felt like a challenge thrown at her feet, a demand to pull back, to retreat. Helen fought the impulse to argue. She understood the risks. Yet, slowing down felt like defeat. How could she pause when so many depended on her? That evening, Helen sat alone in the quiet makerspace, the day's news echoing in her mind. Doubt crept in, whispering questions she had tried to ignore. Are you pushing too hard? Is this mission worth sacrificing your health? She closed her eyes, envisioning Elon Musk's relentless drive, a man who risked everything to launch rockets and electrify industries. But even Elon Musk faced moments of vulnerability. Helen realized that courage wasn't just about pushing forward blindly, it was about knowing when to pause, reflect, and adapt. The next day, Helen called a meeting with her core team. She shared her health concerns honestly, a vulnerability that surprised even herself. The room fell silent for a moment before Emily reached out, placing a comforting hand on Helen's shoulder. "We've got you, Mom. You don't have to do this alone." Margaret nodded in agreement. "You've built an incredible community here. Let us help carry the weight." The team brainstormed ways to distribute responsibilities, creating leadership roles within the network to empower others and ease Helen's load. Helen felt a wave of relief wash over her. The makerspace was no longer just her mission, it was a collective endeavor, fueled by shared passion and support. That week, Helen decided to take a step she hadn't imagined before. She signed up for a yoga class tailored for seniors. The first session was humbling, her body unfamiliar with the gentle stretches and mindful breathing. But as she moved slowly through the poses, Helen felt a spark of connection to herself she hadn't felt in years. The practice became a refuge, a daily reminder that care for herself was integral to care for others. Meanwhile, the Makerspace network continued to thrive. Helen's leadership style evolved, blending determination with compassion, vision with self-awareness. She encouraged her team to embrace innovation not only in projects but in how they managed their own well-being. One evening, as Helen prepared to leave the makerspace, she overheard a conversation between two younger volunteers discussing Elon Musk's recent comments on failure and perseverance. "He said failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of success," one said. "It's like what Helen showed us, that setbacks don't define you, they refine you." Helen smiled quietly, feeling the truth of those words settle deep in her heart. But just as her personal and professional lives found new balance, a fresh challenge emerged. A sudden economic downturn hit the region, threatening funding streams and causing uncertainty among partners and donors. The makerspace's future felt fragile once more. Helen convened her team to address the crisis. They strategized ways to tighten budgets without sacrificing programs, explored new funding avenues, and leaned into their community's resilience. The situation tested Helen's resolve like never before. In moments of exhaustion, she reflected on Elon Musk's famous willingness to bet everything on his vision, even when others doubted him. She realized that while bold risk was vital, sustainable change required wisdom, flexibility, and the courage to pivot. During this period, Helen also reconnected with her estranged brother, John, reaching out after years of silence. Their tentative phone calls gradually grew into regular conversations, bridging old wounds and creating space for healing. John shared his own struggles with aging and purpose, and Helen found comfort in their renewed bond. Their reconnection reminded her that transformation wasn't just about external achievements but mending the fabric of relationships that time had frayed. One crisp morning, Helen stood outside the makerspace, watching a group of seniors collaborating on a woodworking project. Their laughter and determination lifted her spirits. A local reporter approached, asking about the makerspace's role in the community during uncertain times. Helen spoke passionately about the power of connection and creativity to overcome isolation and fear. "We're proof that it's never too late to start something new, to push boundaries, and to believe in the impossible," she said. The interview aired on local news, reaching a broader audience and sparking new interest and support. As winter settled in, Helen found herself reflecting on the journey, the setbacks, the victories, the moments of doubt and courage. She realized that growth was not a straight path but a winding road filled with unexpected turns. And through it all, the spirit of Elon Musk's relentless innovation and refusal to accept limits had been a guiding light, reminding her to keep dreaming and daring. That night, Helen penned a letter to the makerspace community, sharing her reflections and encouraging everyone to embrace both strength and vulnerability. She wrote, "We are not defined by our age or our setbacks but by our ability to rise, adapt, and create meaning. Let's keep pushing boundaries, together." The letter was met with overwhelming response, messages of solidarity and inspiration flooding in. Helen felt the deep power of community, a force that transcended individual limits and fears. As the new year dawned, Helen embraced her evolving role, a leader who understood that courage included asking for help, that progress required balance, and that every challenge was an opportunity to grow. The makerspace was no longer just a place, it was a living testament to the power of reinvention at any age. Helen looked forward to what lay ahead, not with naive optimism but with grounded hope and fierce determination. The crossroads she had faced were no longer obstacles but signposts pointing toward new horizons. And with every step, she carried Elon Musk's fearless spirit within her, a reminder that pushing boundaries was not about perfection but persistence, not about never falling but always rising. The makerspace buzzed with renewed energy as winter's chill receded into the promise of spring. Helen's vision was no longer confined to a single building in a small town, it had blossomed into a regional movement. New makerspaces were opening every month, each one a beacon of creativity, connection, and hope for older adults. The network was growing, powered by volunteers, donors, and the stories of transformation that seemed to ripple outward like waves. Helen's days were packed with meetings, planning sessions, media appearances, and workshops. Yet, amid the external momentum, a quieter struggle played out within her. One morning, as Helen looked in the mirror brushing her gray-streaked hair, she caught a glimpse of the woman who had begun this journey, a woman who had once doubted herself, questioned her worth, and feared the passing of time. That reflection stirred something complex, pride, yes, but also the haunting echo of old insecurities. The voice in her head murmured doubts she had worked so hard to silence. Is this sustainable? Will this last? Are you fooling yourself that one person can really change so much? The voice wasn't new, but now, with the weight of responsibility growing, it felt louder. Helen had spent years embracing Elon Musk's audacity, his refusal to accept limits and his fierce willingness to risk failure for the sake of progress. But Musk's story was also one of relentless self-questioning, adaptation, and sometimes brutal honesty with oneself. Helen realized she had to confront her own mirrors, not just the external challenges. That afternoon, she scheduled a retreat, a weekend alone at a cabin by a nearby lake, to reflect, recharge, and recalibrate. The cabin was simple, surrounded by towering pines and the soft murmur of water lapping the shore. Helen sat on the porch, wrapped in a warm shawl, watching the ripples as the sun dipped low. She pulled out a journal and began writing, unfiltered and raw. She wrote of fears about burnout, the loneliness that sometimes seeped in despite the community she had built, and the pressure to keep driving forward. She wrote of the paradox of growth, excitement shadowed by the weight of expectation. As the stars appeared one by one overhead, Helen found solace in the quiet, in the rhythm of nature reminding her of cycles, seasons of growth and rest, light and darkness. She thought of Elon Musk again, not just the icon of success but the man who had endured public failures, personal struggles, and relentless scrutiny. She saw in his journey the truth that innovation demanded not just boldness but resilience, a willingness to face hard truths and keep evolving. The next morning, Helen returned to town with a renewed sense of clarity. She realized that the makerspace's future depended not just on expanding programs but on deepening the culture of care, for participants, volunteers, and herself. She proposed a new initiative to the team, regular wellness sessions, peer support groups, and workshops on mindfulness and balance. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Emily shared her excitement about creating safe spaces for emotional as well as creative expression. Mark suggested inviting local health professionals to lead sessions. Margaret spoke about the importance of addressing mental health openly in their community. Helen felt a wave of gratitude. This was more than a project, it was a movement rooted in whole-person well-being. Meanwhile, the Makerspace projects continued to inspire. A group of seniors built a solar-powered garden light system, a symbol of sustainable innovation and hope. Another class designed an app to connect older adults with tech support volunteers. These creations embodied Helen's belief that age was no barrier to creativity or impact. Yet the external spotlight brought its own pressures. A major news outlet requested an in-depth feature on Helen and the Makerspace's rapid growth. Helen welcomed the opportunity but also felt the tension of public scrutiny. She wanted to be authentic, to share not just successes but the struggles and doubts that were part of the journey. On the day of the interview, Helen sat with the journalist in a sunlit room filled with handmade art and tools. When asked about her secret to success, Helen paused. "There's no secret," she said softly. "It's about persistence, yes, but also honesty, with yourself and others. It's about embracing vulnerability as much as strength." The interview aired to widespread acclaim, drawing new supporters and sparking conversations about aging, innovation, and community. Messages flooded Helen's inbox, stories from people who felt seen and inspired. One email stood out, from a man named Richard, 72, who wrote about feeling invisible and purposeless until discovering the Makerspace online. "Your story gave me permission to start again," he wrote. "Thank you for lighting a path." Helen felt a deep connection across the miles, a reminder that her journey was not just personal but part of a larger tapestry of lives renewed. Yet with growth came complexity. Managing multiple locations stretched the team's capacity. Helen grappled with decisions about which programs to prioritize and how to maintain quality without spreading too thin. She found herself in meetings with board members debating budgets and strategy, balancing vision with pragmatism. One particularly challenging day, Helen faced criticism from a longtime volunteer who felt the Makerspace was losing its intimate, grassroots feel amid expansion. Helen listened carefully, recognizing the pain behind the words. It was a stark reminder that growth came with trade-offs, and that staying true to core values required constant vigilance. That evening, Helen walked through the original Makerspace, the smell of sawdust and paint filling the air, the walls lined with photographs capturing moments of joy and achievement. She touched a hand-carved plaque that read, "Never too old to dream." Her eyes welled with tears. The journey was far from perfect, but it was real, messy, and alive. Helen sat down to write again, this time a letter to the community. She acknowledged the challenges and uncertainties, and invited everyone to hold space for both success and struggle. "We are building more than a makerspace," she wrote. "We are building a movement of courage, creativity, and connection. Let's keep pushing boundaries, not just outwards, but within ourselves." The letter resonated deeply, sparking heartfelt conversations and renewed commitment. Helen realized that momentum wasn't just about numbers or expansion, it was about the shared courage to face mirrors, to confront fears, doubts, and limitations, and to keep moving forward anyway. Inspired by Elon Musk's example, Helen understood that true innovation was as much about internal growth as external achievement. As spring turned to summer, Helen found herself standing at a community festival, surrounded by laughter, music, and displays of the Makerspace's latest projects. Children and seniors worked side by side, passing tools and stories. The air was thick with possibility. Helen's heart swelled. She thought back to the woman she once was, uncertain, isolated, afraid of fading into irrelevance. Now, she was part of something larger than herself, a network of lives transformed, barriers broken, and futures reclaimed. And she knew the journey would continue, with new challenges and triumphs ahead. But Helen was ready. With every step, she carried the fearless spirit of Elon Musk within her, a reminder that pushing boundaries was a lifelong adventure, fueled by persistence, honesty, and the courage to dream beyond limits. The Makerspace was no longer just a place, it was a mirror reflecting the infinite potential of every life, at every age. The summer sun burned high over the small town, casting long shadows across the bustling makerspace that had become Helen's second home. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut wood, heated metal, and the faint aroma of coffee from the corner cafe where volunteers gathered during breaks. Helen stood near the entrance, watching as a group of seniors collaborated on assembling a drone prototype. Their faces lit up with excitement, fingers deftly connecting circuits and adjusting tiny screws. It was a scene of creation and possibility, a stark contrast to the doubts that had once weighed heavily on Helen's heart. Yet beneath the surface of this thriving community, ripples of uncertainty began to stir. News arrived that a major funding source, one of the pillars sustaining the makerspace's rapid expansion, was being cut due to economic shifts beyond their control. The announcement hit Helen like a punch to the gut. Months of progress, countless lives touched, now threatened by forces beyond her influence. The phone calls started immediately, worried donors, anxious partners, and concerned team members. What do we do now? Emily's voice cracked with frustration during an emergency meeting. Helen felt the pressure keenly. The path forward was unclear, and the stakes had never felt higher. For the first time since this journey began, Helen grappled with a gnawing fear that this fragile momentum might collapse. She retreated to her office, the hum of the makerspace fading as she stared out the window at the sprawling sky. Her mind raced through options, cutting programs, scaling back operations, seeking new grants, but none felt like a solution that would preserve the heart of what they had built. In the quiet, Helen found herself recalling one of Elon Musk's most defining moments, the brink of bankruptcy when SpaceX teetered on the edge of failure. Musk had stared down the abyss, risked everything, and dared to push further despite the odds. That fearless resolve ignited something in Helen. She realized that surrender was not an option, not yet. She called her leadership team back together, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "We're going to fight for this," she declared. "Not just to keep the makerspace alive, but to make it stronger. We'll innovate our way through this, just like Elon did." They brainstormed relentlessly, reaching out to new potential funders, organizing community fundraisers, and leveraging social media to rally support. Helen herself took to local radio interviews and town hall meetings, sharing the makerspace's impact and calling on the community to stand with them. The response was overwhelming. Stories poured in from people whose lives had been changed, like Richard, who credited the makerspace with giving him purpose after decades of isolation. Donations trickled, then surged. Volunteers worked longer hours, fueled by a shared determination. In the midst of this fight, Helen's personal life also faced a test. The toll of stress began to manifest physically, restless nights, persistent fatigue, and the creeping ache in her joints grew louder. Her doctor's warnings echoed again in her mind. The tension between pushing forward and caring for herself tightened like a vice. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Helen sat quietly in her living room, the makerspace quiet behind her. She opened a letter from John, her brother, who had become a steady presence in her life once more. "Remember," he wrote, "you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself, Helen. We all need you strong." The words hit home. Helen recognized that resilience wasn't just about endurance but about balance, knowing when to push and when to rest. She resolved to be kinder to herself, embracing the same courage and self-care that fueled her mission. Meanwhile, the makerspace community rallied in unexpected ways. A group of young engineers from a nearby university volunteered their time and expertise, proposing new projects that blended cutting-edge technology with accessible design for seniors. They worked side by side with older adults, forging bonds across generations. Helen watched these collaborations with a sense of awe and gratitude. The spirit of innovation and connection she had nurtured was spreading, evolving beyond her original vision. At a pivotal board meeting, Helen presented a bold plan to pivot their approach, focusing on sustainable growth, community partnerships, and a hybrid model combining in-person and virtual programs to widen access. The idea was met with cautious optimism. Some questioned the risks, others saw the potential for a new chapter. Helen felt the weight of leadership acutely but stood firm in her conviction. "This is more than survival," she said. "It's about transforming challenge into opportunity." As autumn painted the town in fiery hues, Helen found moments of quiet joy amid the chaos. She joined a pottery class at the makerspace, hands covered in clay, shaping imperfect vessels that mirrored her own journey, flawed but beautiful. She laughed with newfound friends, shared stories, and let herself be vulnerable. The makerspace was no longer just a place of creation, it was a sanctuary of healing. One chilly evening, Helen sat on the porch of her home, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars emerge. She reflected on the tides of change that had swept through her life, the losses, the victories, the doubts, and the relentless hope. She thought of Elon Musk again, not as a distant figure but as a symbol of unyielding courage and the refusal to be limited by fear or circumstance. Helen whispered to herself, "We're all explorers in the vastness of life. Sometimes the journey is uncertain, but the courage to continue is what defines us." The next morning brought a surprise, an invitation from a national foundation to present the makerspace model at a conference on aging and innovation. It was a chance to share their story on a larger stage, to inspire others facing similar challenges. Helen accepted, recognizing this as a milestone, proof that their struggle had transformed into impact. As she prepared her presentation, Helen felt a deep sense of gratitude for every setback that had shaped her resilience. She knew the road ahead would still have twists and turns, but she was ready to navigate them with wisdom and heart. Standing before the audience months later, Helen spoke not just of success but of vulnerability, community, and the power of daring to dream beyond limits. She shared stories of individuals who had reclaimed their purpose, reminding everyone that age was not a barrier but a gateway to new beginnings. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Helen's greatest reward was the connection forged, the spark of hope ignited in others' hearts. Back home, as the makerspace prepared for its next phase, Helen felt a quiet pride. The tides of change had tested her, shaped her, and revealed a deeper strength. She understood now that true innovation was not just about technology or growth but about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, fear and hope, loss and love, struggle and triumph. And through it all, the spirit of Elon Musk's fearless pursuit of possibility remained a guiding star, reminding her that no matter the odds, pushing boundaries was a choice she would make every day. The crisp autumn breeze carried a chill that hinted at winter's approach, but inside the makerspace, warmth radiated from the buzz of activity. Helen moved through the room with a practiced ease, her eyes catching moments of joy, the laughter of seniors learning to solder, the proud smiles of a team finishing a 3D printed prosthetic prototype, the gentle encouragement shared between volunteers and participants. The space had become more than a hub for creativity, it was a living, breathing testament to possibility. Helen paused near a display wall lined with photos and letters sent from makerspaces inspired by theirs, stretching across the country, from California to Maine, from bustling cities to quiet rural towns. Each message was a story of hope, a spark kindled by the example they had set. It struck Helen profoundly, their work had rippled outward, touching lives far beyond what she had imagined. The feeling was both humbling and exhilarating. She thought back to the early days, when the idea had seemed so fragile, so uncertain. Now, as she stood on this broader horizon, she understood that the true impact was not just the physical spaces or the projects created but the shifting mindset, the reclaiming of agency and purpose among those who had once felt invisible. The makerspace was a mirror reflecting the infinite potential of every life, at every age. Yet, amidst the success, Helen felt the gentle tug of reflection, a yearning to understand what all of this meant on a deeper, more personal level. She carved out time in her schedule for solitude, retreating to her favorite spot by the lake, where the water mirrored the vast sky. There, she journaled her thoughts, pondering legacy, not just in the sense of what she would leave behind but the ongoing echoes her work might send into the future. How could she ensure that the movement she had ignited would endure, grow, and continue to inspire? The answer came slowly, wrapped in the stories she carried with her, the faces of seniors who had found new friendships, rekindled passions, or simply a place to belong. Helen realized that legacy was living, breathing connection. It was the shared courage to dream beyond limits, passed from one person to another. Inspired by this insight, Helen launched a new initiative, a mentorship program pairing seasoned makerspace veterans with newcomers, creating a circle of wisdom, support, and shared growth. The program flourished quickly, weaving threads of community tighter and deeper. Meanwhile, Helen found herself drawn again to the writings and interviews of Elon Musk. Beyond the headlines of rockets and electric cars, she was captivated by his reflections on the importance of long-term vision and the willingness to embrace failure as a teacher. Musk's relentless curiosity and refusal to be constrained by conventional thinking echoed in Helen's own evolving philosophy. She began incorporating these themes into workshops, encouraging participants to embrace experimentation, to see mistakes not as setbacks but as steps toward mastery. The culture of the makerspace shifted subtly but powerfully, toward radical acceptance, fearless exploration, and resilient hope. One afternoon, Helen received an invitation that felt like a culmination of her journey so far, a request to speak at a national summit on aging innovation, alongside thought leaders, policymakers, and technology pioneers. The honor was immense, and the pressure palpable. She poured her energy into preparation, crafting a message that was authentic and urgent. When the day arrived, Helen stepped onto the stage with steady determination. She shared the story of the makerspace, the humble beginnings, the struggles, the breakthroughs, and, most importantly, the people at its heart. She spoke candidly about the fears and doubts that had accompanied her, the societal barriers that painted aging as decline, and the radical choice to push against those narratives. Her voice carried the weight of lived experience and the spark of unwavering hope. The audience responded with standing ovations and heartfelt conversations afterward. Helen realized that the conversation about aging was shifting, moving from resignation to possibility, from invisibility to celebration. This momentum fueled new partnerships and collaborations, expanding the makerspace reach into policy discussions and technology development focused on accessibility and inclusion. Back at home, Helen found solace in the everyday moments that grounded her, the morning sun filtering through her kitchen window, the quiet hum of her garden buzzing with bees, the phone calls from Richard and others whose lives had been transformed. These connections reminded her that change was deeply personal, woven through the fabric of community. Yet, as Helen looked ahead, she felt a stirring of new questions, about the future of technology, the evolving needs of an aging population, and the ways they could continue to innovate without losing the human touch that made their work meaningful. The path was uncharted, but Helen's resolve was firm. She embraced the spirit of exploration that Elon Musk exemplified, not as a distant ideal but as a living ethos within her and the community she nurtured. One evening, Helen hosted a gathering at the makerspace, bringing together participants, volunteers, partners, and local leaders. The air was alive with conversation, ideas, and laughter. Stories flowed, of challenges overcome, friendships formed, and dreams rekindled. Helen listened, her heart full. She stood to speak, her voice steady and warm. "This is our legacy," she said. "Not a building or a project, but a community where every person is seen, valued, and empowered to create. We are proof that age is not an end but a beginning. Together, we push the boundaries of what's possible." The room erupted in applause, a chorus of affirmation and shared commitment. Helen felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the echoes of tomorrow were already taking shape in this moment. As the night wore on and the crowd thinned, Helen stepped outside, the sky a canvas of stars. She breathed deeply, feeling the connection between past, present, and future. In that vastness, she found both humility and strength, a reminder that every choice, every act of courage, was part of a larger story unfolding. And in that story, there was no final chapter, only endless possibility. The journey continued. The chill of early winter had settled over the town, blanketing the streets with frost and casting a pale light through the bare branches of ancient oaks. Inside the makerspace, the atmosphere was more charged than usual. Helen sat at her desk, a flood of emails and reports spread before her like a map of possibilities and pitfalls. The makerspace was thriving in some ways, growing in reach and recognition, yet the challenges looming on the horizon were real and daunting. A major technology company had approached with an offer, a significant investment to develop a new digital platform that would connect makerspaces nationwide, integrate virtual workshops, and use AI tools to tailor learning experiences. It was an opportunity that could propel Helen's vision into a new era of innovation and accessibility. But there was a catch. The deal required relinquishing a degree of control and steering the organization toward a model that some feared might prioritize profit over community. Helen knew the proposal sparked debate among the board and volunteers. For many, it was a chance to secure financial stability and expand impact. For others, it threatened the very soul of the makerspace, the intimate, human-centered culture that had been carefully nurtured from the start. Helen wrestled with the crossroads before her, the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. She paced the room, memories swirling, of the lonely nights doubting her own strength, the first sparks of hope ignited by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of the impossible, the countless faces of seniors who had rediscovered purpose and joy within these walls. Could she sacrifice the makerspace's essence for growth? Or was this the bold leap that Musk himself would have taken, the risk that defined progress? One evening, Helen gathered the leadership team for an honest and heartfelt discussion. Voices rose and fell, passionate and raw. Emily spoke of the need to protect the makerspace values, to guard against losing the personal touch amid technological expansion. Mark argued that embracing innovation was essential to meeting the evolving needs of their community. Margaret reminded them of the importance of listening to participants' voices above all else. Helen listened deeply, knowing that the decision would shape not just the organization but the lives it touched. She reflected on Elon Musk's philosophy, not blind risk-taking, but calculated boldness rooted in purpose and vision. After days of contemplation, Helen made a decision, to accept the partnership but with firm conditions, protections for community governance, transparency, and a commitment to inclusivity and accessibility. She drafted a proposal that balanced ambition with integrity, a blueprint for collaboration rather than takeover. The negotiations were tough, marked by moments of tension and compromise. Helen drew strength from her team and the community's unwavering support. She remembered a quote from Musk, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That belief became her anchor. As winter deepened outside, the makerspace began a transformation. The new digital platform launched with fanfare, bringing virtual workshops to rural seniors who had never before accessed such resources. AI-powered tools helped tailor projects to individual needs and interests, breaking down barriers of technology anxiety. Yet, Helen worked tirelessly to maintain the warmth and connection that defined their culture. Weekly in-person gatherings continued, storytelling circles flourished, and peer mentoring programs strengthened bonds. Helen herself spent hours engaging with participants both online and offline, bridging worlds with empathy and vision. The balance was delicate, but slowly, it took shape. One afternoon, Helen received a message that crystallized the impact of this new chapter, a video from a woman named Clara, 68, living in a remote town. Clara spoke of how the virtual workshops had opened doors she thought were closed forever. She showed Helen a small wooden sculpture she had crafted, her eyes shining with pride. "You gave me a second chance," Clara said softly. Helen felt tears prick her eyes. It was moments like this that made every challenge worthwhile. Yet, not all changes were smooth. Some longtime volunteers struggled to adapt to the digital shift, feeling alienated or overwhelmed. Helen organized training sessions and support groups, encouraging patience and mutual learning. She acknowledged the fears of losing community intimacy and worked actively to preserve it. Helen's own journey mirrored these tensions. The pace of change was relentless, demanding resilience and self-compassion. She leaned into mindfulness practices, deep breathing, and the wisdom she had gathered over years of growth. Late one night, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and troubleshooting, Helen sat quietly in her kitchen, a cup of tea warming her hands. She reflected on the crossroads she had faced and the courage it took to step forward. Elon Musk's words echoed in her mind. Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. Helen smiled, recognizing that embracing uncertainty was not weakness but strength. The makerspace was a living experiment, sometimes messy, sometimes uncertain, but always propelled by the hope of creating something better. In the weeks that followed, Helen witnessed transformations not just in the organization but in herself. She grew more comfortable with ambiguity, more willing to delegate, and more open to learning from missteps. Her leadership evolved from control to collaboration, from fear to trust. The community, too, adapted and thrived, proving that age was no barrier to resilience or reinvention. At a celebratory event marking the platform's first anniversary, Helen stood before a crowd of Makerspace members, partners, and supporters. She spoke with a voice full of gratitude and resolve. This journey has tested us, challenged us, and transformed us. But through it all, we have remained true to our mission, to empower every person to create, connect, and contribute. The future is unwritten, and together, we will keep pushing boundaries. As applause swelled around her, Helen looked out at the faces illuminated by hope and possibility. She knew the road ahead would hold new challenges, but she was ready to meet them with courage and heart. Inspired by Elon Musk's fearless spirit and relentless drive, Helen embraced the unknown, not as a threat but as an invitation to grow, innovate, and dream beyond limits. The makerspace was no longer just a place, it was a movement, a testament to the power of choice and the endless potential within every life. And Helen, standing at this crossroads, chose boldly. The journey continued. Winter deepened its hold on the town, the long nights stretching like shadows across the landscape. Inside her home, Helen sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift softly against the dark sky. The familiar quiet was a balm to her restless mind, yet beneath the calm lay a storm of worry she could no longer ignore. The past weeks had brought difficult news. Her closest friend and co-founder of the makerspace, Robert, had been diagnosed with a serious illness. The diagnosis hit like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile balance Helen had worked so hard to maintain. Robert had been more than a partner, he was a brother in arms, a source of wisdom, laughter, and unwavering support. Now, his health was failing, and the weight of impending loss settled heavily on Helen's heart. She found herself grappling with feelings she had long kept at bay, fear, helplessness, and the haunting question of what would happen to their shared dream if he was gone. The makerspace was thriving, but this personal crisis threatened to unravel the fabric of everything Helen had fought for. In the days that followed, Helen juggled hospital visits, staff meetings, and community events, each demanding her presence and strength. Exhaustion gnawed at her edges, but she refused to falter. Drawing on the lessons she had learned from Elon Musk's public battles, his candid acceptance of failure and relentless forward drive, Helen embraced the uncomfortable truth that vulnerability was not weakness but a vital part of courage. One evening, after a long day, Helen sat by Robert's bedside in the hospital. The sterile white walls contrasted with the warmth of their friendship, which filled the room like a quiet light. Robert smiled weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've built something incredible, Helen. Don't let my illness dim it." She squeezed his hand, tears threatening but held back by resolve. "We're in this together. And we'll find a way." That night, as snow blanketed the world outside, Helen reflected on the fragility and strength of life. She thought of Elon Musk's tenacity, how he faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles and chose to press on with unyielding focus. Inspired, Helen vowed to channel that same determination not only for the makerspace but for herself and those she loved. Back at the makerspace, the community rallied around Helen and Robert. Volunteers organized meal deliveries, support groups, and fundraisers for medical expenses. Stories of resilience and kindness flowed freely, reminding Helen that she was never truly alone. In the midst of crisis, a deeper sense of connection emerged, knitting the community closer than ever. Helen also turned inward, embracing practices of mindfulness, meditation, and self-care that she had once dismissed as indulgences. She recognized that sustaining hope required tending to her own well-being, allowing space for grief and renewal. Slowly, she found moments of peace amid the chaos. One afternoon, Helen received a letter from a participant named Grace, a retired teacher who had joined the makerspace to overcome loneliness after losing her husband. Grace wrote of how Helen's story had given her strength to face her own battles with health and loss. The letter moved Helen deeply, a reminder that the light she kindled extended far beyond her immediate circle. It was proof that even in darkness, hope could shine. As winter gave way to early spring, Robert's condition stabilized, and Helen found renewed energy to lead. She initiated a new program within the makerspace focused on wellness and resilience, combining creative expression with emotional support. Workshops on storytelling, art therapy, and gentle movement became spaces where seniors could share their struggles and triumphs openly. The makerspace evolved again, embracing not just invention but healing. Helen's own journey mirrored this transformation. She discovered strength in vulnerability, hope in uncertainty, and community in shared humanity. Elon Musk's example continued to inspire, a reminder that setbacks were part of the path, and the courage to continue to find true leadership. One evening, as Helen closed the makerspace after a long day, she looked up at the stars shining brightly above. The vastness of the universe was humbling and exhilarating, a reminder of infinite possibility amid life's fleeting moments. Helen whispered a quiet promise to herself, to face whatever came with open heart and unyielding spirit. The journey was far from over. The light she carried, born of struggle and hope, would guide her forward. The first hints of spring breathed life into the sleepy town, buds bursting through thawing earth, promising renewal and growth. Helen stood outside the makerspace, her breath visible in the crisp morning air, a flutter of anticipation stirring within her chest. After months of reflection and rebuilding, she was ready to embark on a new chapter, one that would push the boundaries of what she thought possible, both for herself and the community she had nurtured. The idea had come unexpectedly, sparked by a conversation with a young engineer visiting from a nearby city. She had spoken passionately about sustainable technology, renewable energy, and the untapped potential of older adults to lead innovation in these fields. Helen's mind raced with possibility. What if the makerspace could become a hub not just for creativity but for meaningful environmental impact? What if seniors could pioneer projects that addressed climate change, energy efficiency, and conservation? The vision ignited a fire within her, a fusion of purpose, hope, and challenge. It was daunting, yes, but also exhilarating. Helen dove into research, reaching out to experts, environmental groups, and community leaders. She convened brainstorming sessions, inviting makerspace members to dream big and imagine a future where their skills and experience could create real-world solutions. The response was electric. Ideas flowed freely, from solar-powered garden installations to water-saving devices to educational programs for youth and seniors alike. Helen saw the familiar faces light up with renewed passion and possibility. Inspired by Elon Musk's audacious goals and fearless pursuit of sustainability, Helen knew this venture would require boldness and resilience. She set ambitious targets and mapped out a plan that balanced innovation with accessibility, ensuring that projects could be scaled and adapted by participants of all abilities. As spring unfurled, the makerspace buzzed with renewed energy. Workshops filled with eager hands assembling prototypes, sketching designs, and testing materials. Helen marveled at the vibrant collaboration, older adults mentoring younger volunteers, technology blending with tradition, creativity sparking practical solutions. Challenges arose, funding gaps, technical hurdles, skepticism from some community members, but Helen met each with determination and openness. She shared stories of Musk's setbacks and comebacks, reminding everyone that failure was a stepping stone, not a dead end. The makerspace became a laboratory of hope and action, a place where age was not a limitation but a strength. One project that captured Helen's heart was the Solar Garden Initiative, an effort to design affordable, easy-to-install solar panels for community gardens and public spaces. Led by a team of seniors and young engineers, the project combined environmental impact with social connection. The garden became a sanctuary of learning and growth, a tangible symbol of their shared commitment to the future. As the months passed, Helen found herself growing in unexpected ways. The challenges stretched her mind and spirit, calling on reserves of creativity, patience, and courage she hadn't known she possessed. She forged new partnerships with environmental organizations, tech companies, and local governments, amplifying the makerspace's reach and impact. Yet amidst the whirlwind of activity, Helen remained grounded by the quiet moments, the smile of a participant who mastered a new skill, the laughter shared over a shared meal, the evening walks by the lake where she found peace and clarity. These moments were the threads weaving her journey into a tapestry of meaning. One afternoon, Helen received an invitation to speak at a prestigious conference on aging and sustainability. It was an opportunity to share the makerspace story on a national stage, to inspire others to rethink aging and innovation. Helen prepared with care, crafting a message that blended honesty, vision, and hope. Standing before an audience of policymakers, activists, and thought leaders, Helen spoke with passion and conviction. She described how embracing change and daring to dream had transformed not only the makerspace but the lives of its members. She challenged assumptions about aging, urging listeners to recognize the power of experience and the urgency of collective action on environmental issues. The response was overwhelming: applause, invitations for collaboration, and heartfelt conversations that extended well beyond the conference. Helen returned home energized and inspired, ready to deepen her commitment to this new horizon. As summer approached, the makerspace launched a community-wide campaign to raise awareness about sustainable living, hosting events, workshops, and outreach programs. Helen watched with pride as participants of all ages came together, united by a shared purpose. She reflected on how far they had come, from a small group seeking connection to a vibrant movement pushing boundaries and sparking change. Yet, Helen knew the journey was far from over. The path ahead would demand resilience, innovation, and unwavering hope. Inspired by Elon Musk's example, she embraced uncertainty as a canvas for creation, a challenge to be met with courage. One evening, as Helen closed the makerspace, she paused to gaze at the stars twinkling above. The vastness of the universe reminded her of the endless possibilities within and around her. She whispered a quiet affirmation: "The future is ours to build." The journey continued, bold, bright, and full of promise. The summer sun poured through the tall windows of the makerspace, casting warm pools of light onto scattered tools and half-finished projects. The hum of activity was a comforting soundtrack, a reminder of how far the community had come. Helen moved among the tables, exchanging smiles and encouragement with volunteers, her heart full but her mind alert. It was in moments like this that she felt the full weight of the responsibility she carried, not just as a leader but as a steward of a dream that had grown far beyond her original vision. Just as she was about to step into the small office she used for meetings, her phone buzzed sharply. The screen displayed a name that made her pause: Victor Hayes, a wealthy entrepreneur known for his vast tech empire and philanthropic investments. Helen's pulse quickened with a mixture of excitement and caution. Victor had reached out with an offer, a generous donation to expand the makerspace into a state-of-the-art facility, equipped with the latest technology and resources. The opportunity was dazzling: new workshops, advanced tools, scholarships for seniors from underprivileged backgrounds. It could catapult the makerspace into national prominence and secure its future for decades to come. Yet, there was an unspoken expectation. Victor's vision came with strings attached: influence over programming, branding rights, and a steering role on the board. Helen had seen this pattern before: powerful benefactors who demanded control in exchange for support. She knew that accepting could bring incredible resources but risked compromising the makerspace's core values: community-driven, inclusive, and grounded in authentic connection. That evening, Helen sat alone in the quiet of her home, the offer turning over in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't solve. The room was filled with memories: the worn photos on the walls, the letters from participants, the small inventions and crafts that symbolized the makerspace spirit. She thought of Robert, of Clara, of Grace, and the countless others who had found light and purpose here. Could she hand over control and trust that the heart of the makerspace would survive? Or would it be swallowed by ambition and corporate interests? Helen reached for her phone and opened a podcast she had bookmarked months ago, an interview with Elon Musk. His voice was calm but fierce, recounting his own battles with investors, critics, and doubt. "When you're trying to do something truly transformative," Musk said, "you have to hold on to your vision like a lifeline. It's tempting to bend, to compromise, but the real breakthrough comes from staying true to your purpose, no matter the pressure." Helen let those words settle deep within her. She realized that this was more than a decision about funding. It was a test of integrity, courage, and leadership. She resolved to confront the challenge head-on, with openness and clarity. The next day, Helen convened a meeting with the board and key volunteers. She laid out the offer and the conditions transparently, inviting honest discussion. Emotions ran high, some were eager for the chance to grow, others wary of losing autonomy. The debate was intense, reflecting the complex realities of passion and pragmatism. Helen listened carefully, striving to honor every voice while holding fast to the values that had built their community. After hours of dialogue, Helen proposed a path forward. They would engage with Victor on the condition that the makerspace retained full creative control and that all programming decisions remained community-led. They would negotiate branding that honored their identity and ensured accessibility remained a priority. The group agreed to this approach, recognizing that compromise could be a tool for growth rather than surrender. Over the next weeks, Helen worked tirelessly with Victor and his team, navigating legal documents, strategic plans, and countless conversations. She was meticulous, firm yet diplomatic, channeling Musk's persistence and strategic thinking. There were moments of tension when Victor pressed for more influence, but Helen's resolve never wavered. She reminded herself that this was a partnership, not a takeover. Slowly, an agreement took shape, one that balanced resources with respect, ambition with authenticity. The announcement of the new partnership sent ripples through the community and local media. Coverage highlighted the makerspace's innovative spirit and its commitment to empowering seniors through technology and creativity. Helen stood at the center of it all, proud but mindful of the journey ahead. With new funding secured, the makerspace expanded rapidly. Construction transformed the old building into a modern hub with open labs, collaborative spaces, and cutting-edge tools. Helen ensured that accessibility remained paramount, ramps, assistive devices, and programs tailored to varied abilities. The energy was electric, a fusion of excitement and purpose. Yet, Helen never lost sight of the personal connections that made the makerspace special. She continued to host storytelling nights, mentorship circles, and community meals. The new facility became a place where innovation met humanity, where technology served as a bridge rather than a barrier. One afternoon, Helen was approached by a young woman named Maya, a participant who had struggled with loneliness and self-doubt. Maya shared how the makerspace had changed her life, giving her confidence, friends, and a sense of belonging. She spoke of a project she was passionate about, designing affordable assistive devices for seniors with mobility challenges. Helen listened, heart swelling with hope. She realized that the true gift of the makerspace, and the partnership, was the power to amplify voices like Maya's, to transform individual dreams into collective reality. As summer waned, Helen found herself reflecting on the journey, the risks taken, the fears faced, the victories won. She understood that leadership was not about perfection but about commitment to values, adaptability, and the courage to face the unknown. Elon Musk's words echoed once more, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." Helen smiled, feeling the truth of those words in her bones. The unexpected gift was not just the funding or the facility, but the chance to deepen her purpose and renew her promise, to lead with heart, vision, and unwavering integrity. The makerspace was more than a place, it was a movement born of dreams, courage, and community. And Helen was ready to carry it forward, come what may. The crisp autumn air carried a promise of change as Helen arrived early at the makerspace, the new facility humming softly with life. The transformation was remarkable. A place that once struggled to keep its doors open was now a beacon of innovation, hope, and community. Yet beneath the surface, Helen felt the familiar flutter of anxiety. Today was the day of the big demonstration, the culmination of months of work on their flagship project, an affordable, solar-powered assistive device designed to enhance mobility and independence for seniors. The project had been championed by Maya, the young engineer Helen had met months ago, and nurtured by a dedicated team of seniors and volunteers who poured their hearts into every detail. The stakes were high. Success meant more than just a functional prototype, it represented a validation of their vision, a tangible proof that older adults could lead groundbreaking innovation with real-world impact. Failure, however, threatened to unravel the fragile momentum they had built. Helen paced the spacious workshop, running through the checklist in her mind. The solar cells were aligned, the sensors calibrated, the software tested. But no matter how prepared she felt, the nerves gnawed at her. She thought back to Elon Musk's story, to the years of failed rocket launches, the near bankruptcy of Tesla, the relentless pressure to succeed against all odds. Musk had said, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Helen embraced that truth, steeling herself to face whatever came next. As the team gathered, the room filled with a buzz of anticipation. Reporters, community members, and potential investors had arrived, their curiosity palpable. Helen welcomed them with warmth and authenticity, her voice steady as she introduced the project and its mission. Maya stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride and determination. The demonstration began. The device, a lightweight walker fitted with solar panels and smart sensors, glided smoothly across the floor, responding to commands and adjusting to uneven surfaces. Participants tested it eagerly, their faces lighting up with surprise and delight. The room erupted with applause. For a moment, Helen allowed herself to breathe deeply, savoring the triumph born of perseverance and teamwork. But the breakthrough went beyond technology. As stories poured in from users describing newfound freedom and confidence, Helen felt a profound shift within herself. The makerspace was no longer just a place to create, it was a catalyst for transformation, for reclaiming agency and purpose in a world that often overlooked older adults. The event sparked widespread attention, drawing invitations to speak at conferences, collaborate with universities, and partner with healthcare providers. Helen found herself at the heart of a growing movement that challenged societal narratives about aging and innovation. Yet, amid the excitement, Helen remained grounded. She remembered the quiet moments, the late nights spent troubleshooting, the gentle encouragements shared over coffee, the tears shed in frustration and hope. These were the threads that wove the fabric of their success. One evening, as Helen walked home beneath a sky streaked with stars, she reflected on the journey. The fears, the setbacks, the doubts, they were all part of a larger story of resilience and purpose. She realized that the breakthrough was not just about technology but about breaking through the barriers of age, invisibility, and self-limitation. In the weeks that followed, Helen worked tirelessly to expand the makerspace's reach, developing programs that blended technology with wellness, creativity with social connection. She mentored new leaders, fostering a culture of empowerment and inclusivity. The community thrived, a living testament to what could be achieved when courage met opportunity. Throughout it all, Helen kept returning to Elon Musk's mindset, his refusal to accept the status quo, his willingness to risk failure for the sake of progress. She carried that spirit within her, a guiding light through uncertainty and change. One afternoon, Helen received a letter from Robert, her longtime friend and co-founder, now recovering steadily. His words were filled with pride and encouragement, a reminder of the bonds that had sustained her. "You've taken us all to new heights," he wrote. "Keep pushing. The best is yet to come." Helen smiled, feeling the full circle of her journey. From the shadows of doubt and loss to the bright horizon of possibility, she had found her way. The breakthrough was not an endpoint but a new beginning, a call to continue dreaming, daring, and building. As the sun set, casting golden light across the makerspace, Helen stood at the window, gazing out with a heart full of hope. The future was vast, and she was ready to meet it head-on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?